llega de la resistencia de las mujeres frente a la creciente represión y al fascismo y a la criminalización llevada a cabo por Duterte. Y frente a esto, JoJo cree que la mejor forma de fortalecernos como mujeres es consolidando las filas de las mujeres de la clase trabajadora, construyendo la solidaridad internacional. Y contigo, JoJo, estamos todas juntas construyendo solidaridad sin fronteras, porque en ningún lugar del mundo queremos un feminicidio más. Y por eso acá estamos lanzando esta iniciativa. Así que, JoJo, es una felicidad estar contigo. Me encantaría que nos comparta un poco de este tejido y también de la dinámica que va a estar hoy en la organización de este encuentro. So, JoJo, thank you very much. I talked.
Okay, thank you, Alessia. Before we start, I'll just repeat some few reminders. First, please make sure that in your identification tag, please rename it to put your name, organization, and country. Second, your microphones are automatically muted so as not to distract the speakers and to lessen unnecessary noises. If you have any questions, you can either direct it in the chat box or use the raise hand function and wait for your name to be called. You are also free to share your manifestations here about the conversation that will take place. And also, as what we have repeated a while ago, we will be using English and Spanish, but there will also be translation in Arabic. Just press the button of French and Kurdish. The button is Korean. So there's a button indicating translation for your preferred language. So now, as Alessia had already told you about, that this campaign on feminicide is our attempt to make a global call on the growing trend of women being killed, not just because of their gender, but more so because of their political convictions. They are killed because the powers that be want their dissenting voices to be muffled. So since the first quarter of this year, a group of women from different continents have come together to talk about the importance of this campaign, the importance of weaving together to save the lives of women, to stop feminicide. Our gathering today is the fruit of those series of discussions, right, Alessia? Do you have still additional things to say about our campaign? And also to introduce our first and our resource person for the night.
Yes, JoJo, that was so clear. Gracias, JoJo. Estuvo muy claro todo lo que nos cuentas de la campaña. Y también en este inicio queremos compartir que hemos decidido de realizar el encuentro de hoy en esta fecha, el 23 de junio, para rememorar 3 activistas del movimiento de mujeres kurdas, Zehra Berkel, Emine Weiss y Hebun Meral Kelly, que el 23 de junio del año pasado han sido asesinadas por el Estado turco en Kobane, la ciudad del norte y este de Siria, que ha sido liberada del Estado Islámico gracias a una resistencia liderada por mujeres. Entonces, en la memoria de Zehra, Emine, de Ebun, de nuestras precursoras, todas que nos encontramos hoy y que resistiremos en cada parte, tanto en Turquía como hemos hecho enjuiciando a Erdogan, como en Nicaragua, donde desde esta hora las mujeres están luchando, las mismas que derrotaron la dictadura somocista en los 70, están presas en la cárcel por el régimen de Ortega y las queremos libres. Nos queremos libres, nos queremos vivas y nuestro acuerpamiento contra toda dictadura para sostener la lucha de las mujeres contra el feminicidio desde una justicia a otra. En todo el mundo, tanto en Nicaragua como en Afganistán, tanto en Filipinas, como en México, como en Colombia, donde sigue la movilización también de los pueblos y de las mujeres en el paro nacional. Y entonces desde este territorio vamos a iniciar nuestra conversación de introducción a la campaña con Vilma, Rocio, Almendras, Quinguanas, que nos hablará más sobre la iniciativa. Y Vilma es una hija de la organización de Pueblos en Camino, una hija del pueblo Nasa, del pueblo Mizak, habitante del Cauca, la madre de los bosques, al sur de occidente de lo que llaman Colombia. Es comprometida con la lucha de los pueblos y la necesidad de tejer resistencia y autonomías entre proceso. Abrimos nuestros corazones para escucharte, Vilma. Adelante.
Buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches a todas y a todos quienes nos escuchan. Muchísimas gracias por este espacio que hemos venido gestando desde marzo, ¿no? Nos venimos encontrando algunas compañeras, pensando los dolores profundos que están en nuestros huesos, en nuestras entrañas, en nuestro territorio, pero también repensando esas alegrías que tenemos que recuperar, esas emociones que tenemos que tejer frente a tanto dolor, frente a tanta guerra y frente a tanta muerte. Y por esto hemos pensado y hemos decidido lanzar esta campaña que hemos denominado Tejernos para la Vida, para parar los feminicidios, por la vida de nuestras pioneras y precursoras. Hemos dicho ni un feminicidio más. También hemos dicho que todo feminicidio es político. Todos, absolutamente todos son políticos, porque son producto de las relaciones de poder patriarcal que se han impuesto desde hace 5.000 años. Son producto de relaciones de poder, de alianzas religiosas, militares y estatales que han sometido a la tierra, a los pueblos y a nosotras las mujeres desde miles de años atrás. Entonces también hemos dicho que es necesario que nosotras como mujeres que somos reconozcamos para qué nos están matando, principalmente, ¿para qué? ¿Quiénes se benefician con los asesinatos, con la criminalización, con la judicialización, con la desaparición, con la tortura, con la muerte contra nuestras pioneras y precursoras? ¿Quiénes son los principales benefactores con este orden de horror, de terror, en los cuerpos de nosotras y en nuestros territorios? Entonces, hemos discutido que todo este horror corresponde a un modelo, a un orden, a un sistema patriarcal que busca principalmente acumular, que busca despojar, que busca exterminar y que está en todos los territorios, que no hay distinción de raza, de color, de género, aunque está más enfocado en el asesinato y desaparición de mujeres, pero que se da en todos los órdenes sociales, y lo que está buscando es destruir nuestra madre tierra, convertir los bienes comunes en mercancías, acumular riquezas para unas élites transnacionales que necesitan continuar y fortalecer esa alianza de años atrás, lo religioso, lo militar y lo estatal, como desde siglos atrás se han instaurado, y aquí ahora seguimos viendo cómo nos someten, cómo nos dominan y cómo nos desaparecen. Entonces, esa ha sido una de nuestras primeras preguntas. ¿Para qué? ¿Para qué? ¿Qué objetivo? ¿Por qué? ¿Para qué nos están matando? Entonces, es en respuesta a seguir imponiendo y consolidando este orden de horror con transnacionales, con corporaciones, con estados, para usufructuar nuestras luchas y nuestros territorios y dominarnos. Y también nos hemos preguntado ¿por qué? ¿Por qué nos están matando? En todos los lugares, pero particularmente a las mujeres. Entonces, nos están matando porque la mayoría de mujeres que han sido asesinadas en estos últimos tiempos tienen una lucha digna, tienen una palabra coherente, tienen una comunidad que defienden, tienen mandatos colectivos, ancestrales, populares, que están caminando y están defendiendo. Entonces, ¿por qué nos están matando? Porque sencillamente no aceptamos, no permitimos, rechazamos, nos levantamos y no le obedecemos al sistema patriarcal colonial, estatal y racista. No lo hacemos. Entonces, ¿por qué nos están matando? Porque no aceptamos la dominación, porque no aceptamos el silencio, porque no aceptamos la discriminación y porque desde el olvido y desde la penumbra nos seguimos levantando. Entonces, no es fortuito que hayan asesinado a Sekine Yances, no es fortuito que hayan asesinado a Marielle Franco, no es fortuito que hayan asesinado a Ana Fabricia Córdoba, no es fortuito que hayan asesinado a Cristina Bautista. Y así podemos pasar horas y horas nombrando a compañeras, mujeres, indígenas, campesinas, negras, urbanas, ruralizadas, en muchos territorios. Entonces, ¿por qué nos están matando? Porque no queremos obedecer, porque no queremos hacer silencio, porque hemos dicho no más muerte y no más guerra en nuestro territorio. Entonces, esa segunda pregunta la hemos venido abordando. Nos matan porque nos estamos resistiendo y seguimos reexistiendo a pesar de tanto dolor y muerte frente a este sistema y este orden patriarcal y de dominación que nos afecta en todos los ámbitos. Y no es solamente la guerra que viene desde afuera. Las compañeras desde Kurdistan nos han enseñado a reconocer la guerra interna también, como esas formas en menores escalas, pero no por cierto, no peligrosas, el patriarcado, el colonialismo, el Estado, el racismo, está dentro de nuestras estructuras también y cómo lo tenemos que erradicar. Entonces, en ese sentido de reconocer, de un lado, los proyectos de muerte que buscan someter y dominar para acumular riquezas, y de otro lado, nuestros planes de vida, palabras dignas y acciones coherentes para defender la vida frente a la muerte, nos hemos propuesto esta campaña de frenar los feminicidios, retomando, todos los feminicidios son políticos, pero en esta campaña nos queremos enfocar en los feminicidios que van contra nuestras precursoras, pioneras, lideresas, cuidadoras, sanadoras, liberadoras, luchadoras que ya han asesinado y muchas que están aquí, que estamos aquí, que siguen hablando, que se siguen levantando a pesar de todo esto. Entonces nos hemos propuesto varias acciones y una de estas principales, pues fundamentalmente denunciar, ¿no? Denunciar estos proyectos de muerte que nos están despojando, a la par visibilizar las luchas y las dignas resistencias de todos los procesos del mundo encaminadas y encabezadas desde las mujeres y también intercambiar, reconocer, aprender desde procesos de justicia desde los territorios que estén desbordando la injusticia, que estén desbordando la justicia patriarcal, porque la justicia es patriarcal, la justicia es colonial y la justicia es racista. Entonces queremos aprender de esos procesos que ya han habido en otros lugares. Hay tribunales autónomos, hay tribunales autogestionados, hay formas de hacer justicia, hay casas de justicia en diferentes partes del mundo. Entonces, ¿cómo hacer para encontrarnos entre esas experiencias que están desbordando la justicia patriarcal, para reconocernos ahí y ver cómo hacemos para trabajar juntas, reconociendo lo que ya existe? Y también nos hemos propuesto tejernos como mujeres que somos desde la crítica y la autocrítica para repensarnos la organización femenina, la articulación de las organizaciones y movimientos sociales, el tejido de procesos empobrecidos y negados en estos territorios para defender la vida. Esas son las apuestas generales que tenemos desde la campaña y por esto las invitamos a este espacio. Y la última parte que quiero comentar con relación a la campaña y desde donde estoy hablando, que es para denunciar y visibilizar también lo que estamos viviendo en este territorio que llaman Colombia, pero que no es la excepción, que tal vez va a ser la regla y ya se está dando en otros territorios. Es como este orden y este sistema patriarcal, colonial, racista a través de los gobiernos, obviamente fundamentado por los estados, están desarrollando una política fascista, narcoparamilitar, dominante que busca aplastar todo lo que se levante, todo lo que germine, todo lo que florezca en virtud de consolidar, de recuperar y de caminar autonomías, libertades y emancipaciones. Y es lo que nos ha pasado históricamente en muchos lugares, pero que en estos casi 60 días de paro nacional en lo que se ha llamado Colombia, pues se ha visto más descaradamente, más de frente, menos escondido, menos, ¿cómo llamarlo? O sea, antes algunos movimientos, tal vez algunas personas, por lo menos décadas atrás, podían decir que si algo sucede en el territorio hay que llamar a la policía para que nos defienda, porque supuestamente han sido considerados por algunos los héroes de la patria. Nosotros en los territorios, y lo sabemos desde 529 años atrás, que no es así. Con el Estado, 200 años, un poquito de 200 años más, lo hemos sabido. Pero en estos casi 60 días ha quedado mucho más en evidencia, ha quedado mucho más desenmascarado que la fuerza pública no es la fuerza pública, es una fuerza privada, patriarcal, colonial, racista, al servicio de las corporaciones transnacionales que cuidan es la economía de los que están encima de nosotros y de nosotras, empobreciéndonos y matándonos, y no cuidan los mínimos de libertad y de rebelión de los pueblos que estamos desde abajo tratando de caminar resistencias y autonomías. Entonces, no las quiero llenar de cifras, pero sí decirles que nos han matado a muchos en estos 60 días. Hay desaparecidos, desaparecidas, mujeres violentadas sexualmente. Hay jóvenes que este sistema ha denominado desechables porque los puede usar y matar en cualquier momento y ni siquiera son noticia de periódico. Pero desde el 28 de abril se convirtieron no solamente en protagonistas de las noticias de los periódicos, sino también en protagonistas de la dignidad de esto que han llamado Colombia. Porque esas y esos llamados desechables son los que nos devolvieron la dignidad. Se pararon en las barricadas, se pararon en las calles y están gritando que este gobierno no nos representa, que es un gobierno sin vergüenza y que quieren una vida digna, por lo menos 3 comidas al día, que quieren estudiar, que quieren salud, que quieren seguridad, pero seguridad colectiva. Entonces, en estos casi 60 días, la respuesta estatal ha sido la misma, pero con menos formas de tapar y de enmascarar. Estamos cansados de ver en vivos a través de Facebook, que son las redes que han logrado dar a conocer nacional e internacionalmente lo que está pasando, cómo se llevan a los jóvenes, cómo desaparecen, luego aparecen cuerpos mutilados, cercenados, descuartizados, cabezas de jóvenes en bolsas, cómo están matando todos los días en el portal de la Resistencia, en todos los lugares se están matando todos los días, las masacres no cesaron. Entonces, lo que vivimos casi por 5 años en los territorios ruralizados con el llamado acuerdo de paz, que fue un engaño porque se firmó, fue una paz capitalista, una paz colonial y una paz extractivista y patriarcal, lo que garantizó fue la entrada de transnacionales y corporaciones a los territorios donde antes no habían podido entrar, y el despojo y la muerte y la masacre se consolidó. Entonces todo esto que vivíamos y que denunciábamos desde las montañas lo hemos visto en estos 60 días en las ciudades, porque nos están matando, nos están masacrando, nos están desapareciendo y nos están violando. Y esto quiero denunciarlo y visibilizarlo desde lo que han llamado Colombia, porque no es fortuito que pase aquí en lo que han llamado Colombia, con las riquezas que tenemos naturales, culturales en nuestro territorio. Y sabemos que está pasando en otros territorios y que es un proyecto de muerte global. Y finalmente que frente a estas movilizaciones de muchos pueblos, no solamente los jóvenes desde los sectores urbanos, sociales y populares, sino también los movimientos indígenas, los movimientos negros y los movimientos campesinos, como que una lección, 3 lecciones que nos ha quedado desde las discusiones en las asambleas, en los paros, en las marchas, es 1, reiterar que los militares llamados fuerza pública no son fuerza pública, son fuerza privada al servicio de las transnacionales y que a los paros no salimos a confrontarlos, que es un error desgastarnos confrontándolos, pero tenemos que defendernos, es inevitable, no nos podemos dejar matar. Dos, que nosotras y nosotros desde los procesos tenemos que entender que las movilizaciones son maravillosas, son impresionantes y cambian cosas, pero no son suficientes. Más allá de las movilizaciones, tenemos que tejer resistencias y autonomías entre pueblos y procesos. Son vitales. Toda esa resistencia y esa fuerza de los pueblos que ha emergido en los diferentes puntos de bloqueo, construyendo monumentos de la resistencia, autoalimentándose, autocuidándose, son procesos que deben estar más allá del paro y deben extenderse y consolidarse en todos los territorios. Y lo último es que ojalá, así como hemos estado movilizados, las mayorías también entendiéramos lo que en realidad significa el Estado, más allá de las estructuras y de las políticas de desarrollo y de despojo que nos están matando, sino como esa relación también dominante que nos atraviesa y que nos habita. Y que si logramos entender cómo en realidad que no es ausencia estatal, sino es exceso de ausencia de Estado que nos está matando, entonces podríamos caminar resistencias y autonomías. Eso, muchas gracias a todas y a todos y espero que nos juntemos de aquí en adelante a parar los feminicidios, a parar las desapariciones y sobre todo a tejer resistencias y autonomías entre pueblos y procesos. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias a ti, Vilma, por tus fuertes palabras. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Vilma, for that powerful and information that we got. Now we move to our second speaker from Asia. Now from Latin America. Now we go to Asia. She is a young woman activist who have been active in organizing since her college years in 2003. She's a graduate of agronomy, and she made use of her course in organizing landless farmers, fisherfolk, indigenous people, rural youth, and women.
JoJo, I think the microphone is off now. Yeah.
Sorry. So I'll again repeat what I said about Triana. She is her leadership skills has been recognized in the Asia Pacific region. That she has been the coordinator of the program called BOOM, or Breaking Out of Marginalization of Asia Pacific Forum on Women, Law and Development. Sisters, let us hear Triana Kurnia Wardani from Seruni of Indonesia. Triana?
Thank you, JoJo, for the opportunity. Hello, everyone. I'm Triana from Seruni, Indonesia. So we as Seruni of Indonesia welcome the global campaign, Weaving Ourselves for Life, Stopping Feminicide. Even though there has been a global anti-killing movement and campaign against women for a long time, especially the killing to the female fighters and prisoners by the imperialist puppet government in various countries is still continuing. Therefore, the existence of wider campaign regarding this issue will help to unite the women in the movements. It is also very useful to gather wider sympathy and strength that is meaningfully to the movement. The Indonesian women have a very long history of violence and killings. In the certain history, they became victims of massacre in the Dutch and Japanese colonial era, mass murder on 1965 by Suharto, early fascist regime of New Order, and the killing and rape of Tionghoa ethnic of Chinese during the 1998 reform movement. Then violence, rape, and killings to the women have been published extensively during the armed rebellion in Aceh, Papua, and Timor-Leste, once Indonesia still consisted of 27 provinces. It was a countable amount of women and their movement that experienced oppression and various forms of extreme violence in many countries. During New Order of Suharto, a women labor, Marsina from Sidoarjo, has become symbol of brutality of puppet government. The struggle of women, mothers, as well as struggle of women from minority tribes in all major islands such as Dayak, Anak Rimba, Sakai, Toraja, Luwu, Samin are still happening till today. They are fighting against land grabbing for project of dam construction, mining, and big plantation, as well as maintain their ancestral lands. Violence to women and children in refugee camps and temporary shelters has been always the main story in handling natural disasters in Indonesia. Physical and sexual violence to women is also not a new issue in the job training center of migrant worker delivery service companies and migrant worker agencies. The violence to millions of women Indonesian migrant workers in Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Macau, South Korea have been so acute and unstoppable. During the COVID-19 pandemic, violence to women and children by their husbands and families in the houses keep rising significantly. Various policies and new regulations have been issued by the government regarding the violence to the women. However, the policy and the regulation is just an effort to protect the semi-colonial and semi-feudal ruling system. It's also aimed to silence and prevent the appearance of modern women movement in Indonesia. Extreme oppression to women cannot be faced by the Indonesian women themselves. In the whole Asia and Southeast Asia, similar issues are still raging intensively and widely. Under the fascist government of President Duterte, women activists in urban and rural of the Philippines have become victims of the arrest, prisoning, and killing on the streets. The government of Duterte mobilized the mass to oppress the activism, isolated various anti-government movement by tagging the activism as terrorism entire of the Philippines. This kind of practice is only a duplicate from anti-communist politics of fascist government of Suharto and his new order for ruling in 32 years in Indonesia. Since the coup d'etat in Myanmar, the intensity of oppression to the women and children has increased drastically. It's multiplied the protracted oppression by the local government to the women from various tribes in the island and mountains of Myanmar who fight to establish their own government. The action of anti-coup d'etat and military junta government of Myanmar have to deal with arms, which resulted victims of hundreds, even thousands of women. Furthermore, it also forces young women activists to leave their houses, escape to rural, and take a part in military trainings. They are insecure in the urban area and consider that usual demonstration is not enough to fight the military junta. In the more extreme intensity, the women of Dalit and Adivasi in India have suffered from various kinds of violence and continuous killing during the anti-Maoist campaign in many federal states. Massive restriction and mobility and isolation is due to the incapability of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government in addressing the COVID-19 pandemic in India. It is finally spawned millions extreme violence by men to women in rural households. All women who took part in the peasant action against Modi's policy and new agricultural reform was brutally attacked with guns and tear gas amid their hunger during the action. In entire Asia and Southeast Asia, with the similar intensity and tendency to expand, the women suffer from the endless suffering and without a sign to stop. It is worsening in the midst of intensive implementation of neoliberal policy, imperialist rivalry of the United States and China, and COVID-19 pandemic. The social restriction is not proportional to the ability of the imperialist puppet government to provide social aid. It has created the firestorm of social rebellion that is ready to explode at any moment. During the wider and more intensive operation, the women has been more inspired to gain their new awareness by putting themselves into militant actions. They even join in the armed struggle in many countries in Asia. In the Philippines, CPP and NPA claim they can expand mass bases and increase the number of revolutionary women significantly due to the great operation of Duterte. The struggles against terrorism act are even more expanding in big cities of the Philippines. In the big campus like the University of the Philippines, launch action against the Duterte's government effort to allow the AFP to enter the campuses. The women took part in the action of anti-big mining and plantation of landlords in the big islands of the Philippines. Indonesia faced similar situations. In the midst of COVID-19 pandemic, the women's struggle continues and shows the significant progress even though it is out of mainstream media coverage. The women are keep taking part in large quantities in the action against Omnibus Act on job creation amid the pandemic. The action to commemorate International Women's Day on March 8 and May 1st, 2021 showed that vitality of women and their action to free themselves from oppression of the ruling class and state that maintain men domination in semi-colonial power system. In the midst of anti-insurgency operation, women in Papua still show their braveness to express their willing to be free fully from the oppressive and exploitative system. They are fighting against the crime and terrorism tagging to the National Liberation Movement of West Papua. In other countries of Asia, response against oppression of women is no less great. In India, Dalit and Adivasi women are not willing to hand over their achievement of struggle. The liberation they are achieved from long armed struggle is defended and developed persistently. Also, the Modi's government increase and intensity of brutal anti-insurgency operations. The more intensive and wider of the women operation, the more increasing and the wider of new awareness of women in Asia in the world to unite, feel the same, to be under the same sky of oppression and exploitation of imperialists. However, the oppression and the exploitation of women are impossible to be system in many countries. To be fully omitted without women liberation from the oppression and exploitative system in many countries. These systems are secure with armed forces by imperialists, even in the middle of COVID-19 pandemic today. In Indonesia, the destruction of the semi-colonial and semi-feudal system is a condition for the full liberation of women, mainly peasant women who have been suffered for a long time in the semi-feudal system in rural areas. The destruction of semi-feudal system in the rural area is the requirement to distract imperialist domination in the countries in Southeast Asia as well as countries in same social system in entire of Asia. No more can be done by international monopoly capitalists, but multiplying the oppression and exploitation to the countries and people and to the women in the world. To be realized or not, the oppression and exploitation of imperialists become a forging for the awareness and unity of people and countries in Asia and whole world, especially for women who are tirelessly insist full freedom for themselves, their people, and countries. Hopefully, the campaign of anti-oppression against women with ourselves to life continues to develop, gains wider support from whole women, people, and oppressed nation, and by imperialists in the whole world. Long live international solidarity. Thank you, JoJo.
Thank you, Triana. We have learned a lot about the ongoing repression in the Asian region, and really long live international solidarity. Alessia, can you please introduce our next speaker? And also, may I remind the speakers to speak slowly so that our interpreters will not have a hard time translating or interpreting in the respective languages. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Jojo, y muchas gracias, Triana, de tu fuerte palabra. Y nuestro diálogo sigue ahora desde las experiencias de lucha en los territorios y vamos a Afganistán. Conectada desde la organización KUFA, nos comparte la palabra Fouzi. Fouzi Afshari nació en 1969 en Afganistán y actualmente reside en Estados Unidos. Dedicada en su formación y profesión a los negocios, Fouzi actualmente disfruta trabajar por la igualdad de las mujeres. Esta es su pasión. Y la palabra ahora a ti, Fouzi. Is Fouzi Afshari there? Es posible que Fouzi tuvo un problema técnico.
No, actually, I can hear you guys. Can you guys
That's
hear me?
great. Yes. Adelante. Yes, Fouzi, I introduced you. And
Thank you. I
the
heard.
floor is
Thank
yours.
you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I know we are all around the world. My deep and sincere gratitude to all the vanguards of women liberation from around the world, but more specifically, Kurdish women, Latinas, Filipinas, and Afghan women for putting up the just fight. Allow me to start by a quick history lesson. Afghanistan has had a turbulent and interesting history and has withstood countless invasions, starting in 328 BC when Alexander the Great entered what is today Afghanistan, but was then a part of Persian Empire. Afghanistan as an independent kingdom was founded by Ahmad Shah Durrani, a Pashtun prince who was crowned in 1747. From that date until the coup of 1978, the country was governed by its direct or collateral descendants. In the span of 80 years, from 1838 till 1919, Afghanistan went through 3 Anglo wars with British. In short, Afghanistan has been a forever conflict zone. I believe with that alone, we can find the deep roots of women's sufferance alongside the long-lived patriarchy. Afghanistan is a heterogeneous society. Therefore, the sense of patriarchy varies among the different ethnic groups. For example, from 1880 to 1901, hundreds of thousands of our Hazaras were killed, expelled, and enslaved. A contemporary Hazara writer claims that half of Hazara population were killed at that time. After this genocide, Hazara women entered the labor market as slaves, meaning that Hazara women were forced to produce, and this forced participation changed and weakened the male patriarchal system amongst the Hazaras. While we don't see this progress, while it was forced, but we don't see it in the life of our Pashtun women. To get back to the core point of this campaign, feminicide, the systematic silencing and killing of women. The trend continues in Afghanistan. sometimes in the name of honor killing, sometimes in the name of religious traditions, and sometimes it is a politically motivated matter. In the last 40 years of war in Afghanistan, women have been used as weapons of war, which includes imprisonments, killing, and systematic rapes, both during the invasion of the Soviet Union, during the Civil War, especially in Kabul city, and of course after the invasion of USA forces and NATO. One of the best examples, or perhaps the closest thing I can think of violence in our society in Afghanistan was the killing of Farkhunda. I think this is something perhaps the whole world heard about. It took place 3 kilometers from Kabul's power center, the presidential palace in the heart of Kabul. The resentful mob of men ran the car over her, of course, after killing her. They ran the car over her lifeless body, and they didn't think that was enough. Then they set her dead body on fire. And the police didn't feel any obligation to stop this. Farkhunda wasn't a liberal woman. She wasn't a forward-thinking woman. She was actually a radical Islamist. Yet, it didn't stop these men from giving her the worst death one can think of. And President Ghani back then, it took him, I believe, about 17 days to come out and speak about this. I always consider this my personal September 11. September 11 is a dark day in US history, and this was my personal 9/11. Farkhunda changed the course of history unknowingly, and simply by being part of a society that didn't look at her as a human being. As far as the politically motivated killings of Afghan women today, it continues. We are still being used as weapons. We lost many great women. I want to mention some names. Malala Maiwan, she got killed in December 10th of 2020. She was a TV journalist. Farishta Koistani, she got killed December 24th, 2020. She was a civil society activist. Zakia Erawi and Qadriya Yassini, they were murdered January 17th. They were both Supreme Court judges. Sahida Shahnaz and Mursal Habibi, they got killed March 2nd. They both worked as vaccine technicians. And the list goes on. The systematic killing of women in Afghanistan is a much bigger problem, since we really don't know who is killing our women. The enemy is unknown. I'm talking about the politically motivated killings. The Taliban, who normally claim responsibility for suicide attacks, do not assume responsibility. Ghani's government, which puts practically no effort to ensure the safety and security of its citizens, could also be involved, because the current government wants to show the US that if you leave Afghanistan, that's what's going to happen to women. So that's a very strong possibility as well. We truly don't know. We are working on it. We are trying to find out. To my last point, women's movement history in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, there is no records of independent women's movement in Afghanistan till today. There have been organizations within the framework of leftist parties such as Parcham and Maoists, the Marxist groups, that some women's organizations have taken place, but nothing independent. Most of the presence of women in society since Amanullah King Amon Law 1919 has been very much ceremonial and superficial, and the presence of 30% of women in Afghanistan parliament today is an example of that. In recent years, most individual independent women have been fighting, but in a big picture, because of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, this process has unfortunately been made more into money-making projects. I hope that with solidarity with you ladies, one day we will have an independent movement inside Afghanistan. But till then, we will tell our stories, we will stand up for what's right, and we will continue to raise our voices. I thank you for giving me the opportunity to be part of this esteemed panel. I will remain and listen to the rest of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Fouzi, for that informative speech you have made. Now we move on to our next speaker. Meral Cicek was born in 1983 in a Kurdish guest worker family in Germany. She started political and women's activism at the very young age of 16 within the Kurdish Women's Peace Office in Dusseldorf. While studying political science, sociology, and history at the Goethe University in Frankfurt, she started to work as a reporter and editor for the only daily Kurdish newspaper in Europe, Yeni Özgür Politika, for which she still writes a weekly column. In 2014, she co-founded the Kurdish Women's Relations Office, or REPAC, in southern Kurdistan, in northern Iraq. She's also editorial board member of the Genealogy Journal. Now, friends, let's welcome Meral Cicek.
Thank you, JoJo. Thank you very much, JoJo and Alessia. Hello to everybody. I send you our warmest regards from Kurdistan. While we don't have much time, I will just directly get inside the subject. So I will talk a bit about the situation in Kurdistan, in the different parts of Kurdistan, and I will focus especially on political assassinations by the Turkish state against members of the Kurdish women's movement and the reasons behind. So just to make it clear, since the beginning of the Kurdish resistance against occupation and the rejection of self-determination, the state forces in Kurdistan, which are the Turkish state, the Iranian state, the Iraqi state, and Syria, they always have targeted women also. The reason is that women always have played a crucial role and even a leading role in the popular resistance and uprisings in the different parts of Kurdistan after the foundation of these nation states as a result of the First World War. So, for example, there is the resistance, the popular resistance of Dersim, which was co-led by women, so we have historical women figures like Bessi, like Zarife, and in also different uprisings, we see that women even 100 years ago were playing a leading role in the uprisings in Kurdistan. And the same also we can see in most of the modern national liberation movements, which you have in the different parts of Kurdistan. For example, even in Iranian Kurdistan, women joined the struggle actively, and especially inside the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK, where women are organized completely autonomously. So just since the beginning of the liberation struggle inside the PKK, women were playing an important role, and they have been always targeted also in the beginning of the 90s, where we had very important uprisings in northern Kurdistan, which were led by women. And because of this, the Turkish state, in a special and specific way, targeted women because of their leading role inside the struggle. But assassination as a specific weapon of the Turkish state, especially against the Kurdish liberation movement, and especially the Kurdish women's movement, started 8 years ago. Let's say this policy was founded maybe 10 years ago. And the first example we faced in Paris on 9 January 2013, when three female members of the Kurdistan Workers' Party were assassinated by a member of the Turkish intelligence in the middle of Paris in France. And one of them was Sakine Cansız, who was the only still living and struggling member of the foundation of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, and a kind of living legend also of her role in the resistance in the 1980s in the military prison in Diyarbakir of the Turkish state, where torture was very brutal, and she was really playing a leading role in developing the resistance against this very brutal torture regime. And as woman, she was really able to give hope, to give strengthness, to give courage, and to become an example for all the political prisoners, not just the female, but also the male prisoners. Because of this, she was a living legend. She was the living history also, the living memory of the Kurdish women's liberation movement. And because of this role of her inside the movement, she was targeted together with two comrades of her, whose names are Fidan Doğan and Leyla Şaydemez. And they were executed, they were assassinated by the Turkish intelligence in the middle of Europe. And this happened in January 2013. This is the first example of, let's say, targeted assassination of members of the women's movement in Kurdistan by the Turkish state. Short time later, more or less 3 years later, on January 5, 2016, again, 3 members of the women's movement, this time in the Turkish part of Kurdistan, in a town called Silopi, were targeted, were killed, were assassinated by the Turkish military. Their names are Sevi Demir, Hakize Nair, and Fatma Uyar. And that was a time of urban resistance for the right of self-determination of the Kurdish towns in Turkey. And these 3 women, they were really playing a leading role inside this resistance in this region. And because of this, they were assassinated by the state forces themselves. Another example of this policy of the Turkish state and its backed jihadist organizations is Hevrin Khalaf. Hevrin Khalaf was a Kurdish woman from Rojava, from northern Syria, and she was the co-chair of the Future Party. And in October, on 12 October 2019, she was executed by Turkish-backed Ahrar al-Sharqiya jihadists in Rojava, and that was the time when the Turkish state started its military offensive against the Kurdish cities Serikani and Girespi in northern Syria. And as a result, these cities are now occupied by the Turkish state and its affiliated jihadist forces. And these forces, they captured her in her car and they executed her and later sent a message to her mother showing the picture of her dead body. Last year on this day, on the 23rd of June 2020, in Kobani, which is, let's say, the symbol of the Rojava revolution, because as you all remember, in 2014, this city, this Kurdish city, was occupied by ISIS, and there a very big self-defense resistance took place, led by women, led by the Women's Protection Forces, and there, for the first time, ISIS got defeated. So because of this, Kobani has a very symbolic meaning, not just for people in Rojava, or not just for Kurdish women, and not just for the women's revolution in Rojava, but at the same time for all freedom-seeking women and people around the world, because that struggle, that fight between ISIS and the women's and people's protection units, in a way was symbolizing or representing the resistance of a bright future against darkness. So because of this, I think the struggle or the resistance of Kobani was felt by all people around the world, and there was very big solidarity shown. And I really believe that it's not for coincidence that the Turkish state targeted the members of the local women's liberation movement in Kobani 1 year ago and killed them with an armed drone. And that was the first time that they used this new technology in a very systematic way against the women's movement. So 1 year ago on this day, 3 members of the Kurdish women's movement in Rojava, they were killed by an armed drone attack in Kobani. A short time later, in January of this year, the co-chair and 1 member of a local people's council in a region which belongs to northeast Syria, which is under, let's say, under the administration of the autonomous administration of northeast Syria, but where the majority of the people are Arab, there 2 women who are of ethnic Arabs and who were playing a leading role in the new founded democratic local government there, they were executed by ISIS. And although ISIS proclaimed responsibility for this assassination, we believe that again, the Turkish state is responsible for this assassination, because there you can see, I mean, if we look at the background or let's say the objective of the murderers in this special killing, we see that it's directly against the idea or the project of a democratic model, a democratic system which is based on women's liberation, which is based on equal participation, of radical democracy and ecology. And this model, which started in the Kurdish cities of Rojava or of northeast Syria, is now expanding to cities with Arab majority. And because of this, because women are playing a very crucial role in the social and political transformation there, they really, in a systematic way, target the women that are playing a leading role, that have key position to counter this project itself, to counter the democratic project of the people in northeast Syria and Rojava. Because of this, these 2 members of the People's Council, one of them the co-chair, were assassinated by ISIS. And this is a very systematical policy of the fascist and misogynist Turkish state regime. They do this because they know that women are leading the resistance, women are leading the struggle, and women are also leading the process of creating or constructing a new model a democratic model which is based on equal participation and representation of women. So women are the subjects of this very revolutionary process, and because of this, in a very conscious way, those forces, those misogynist and fascist forces, which are trying to protect their anti-democratic and patriarchal and capitalist regimes, they really, with consciousness, are targeting women. And during the last 10 years, we can see that they use assassination, political murder as a very special weapon inside this war against women's liberation and people's democracy. And I want to stop here. Maybe some other participants later in the second part of the panel want to add some issues, but just as a short overview about the situation in Kurdistan, I wanted to share with you this information. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Meral, for that informative situation about the struggle of the Kurds. The strong message of all these speeches is that when women speak and fight, the fascist governments, in collaboration with imperialist and multinational corporations, tremble in fear and want to quell the protest through killings. So now we open the floor for any questions to our speakers. You can either direct it in the chat box, as I've mentioned earlier, or use the raise hand function and wait for your name to be called. This open forum will be for 15 minutes only, so that we can give more time for sharing for our participants after. So, any questions for our participants? There's a chat box. Alicia? Okay.
Yes, I was translating the message, like, pueden escribir en la chat su nombre si tienen preguntas.
Yeah, so as we are waiting for the questions, I already saw some women, strong women indicating interest to be part of the campaign. Miss Ibtisam Al-Shamari and Miss Claudia Corol. So I know that before this